Hello and welcome back to Dr. Logic Awkwardly Does Logic. I'd promise you a cat this time, but every time I start talking at the screen, she gets pissed off and leaves. There. Cat butt. This time, let's talk about the soundness of conditional introduction. This is going to be slightly different from the conjunction one because, if you remember how conditional introduction works, we have this little subproof that we make. So it still involves the same sorts of ideas and techniques. The idea that if what we have already done in our proof so far is sound, so if the assumptions are true, then what we have derived from it is true. It's the same sort of thing that's going on, except we're going to be doing it with respect to this little subproof. So, shall we begin? Oh, I didn't clear my board from last time. Cleared. Okay. So what we are interested in now is the soundness of conditional introduction. So again, we want to think about what would a proof that uses conditional introduction look like? That is, let n be a line in our proof with annotation, conditional introduction, and then this rule cites a range of lines rather than individual lines. So we've got where from I to j, where I and j aren't the same, I is less than n, j is less than n. And this time we do have to have that I is less than j because it's a range and we have to have that the initial assumption that we start with comes before the thing that we've concluded in the proof. So this is what it would look like. Spelling this out, this means that there is a well-formed formula of the form phi implies psi on line n, with phi occurring as an assumption on line I, and psi is derived on line j. Now, of course, I through j are making up this subproof, and n is on closes that scope line and comes back out. But those details don't matter for just kind of spelling out what formulas are on what line. So the crucial assumption is that the subproof from lines I to j is less complex than the larger proof that it's in. So the proof it is a subproof of. So what we want to assume is that that entire subproof is sound. So we can assume this subproof is sound. What this means is that every truth value assignment that makes our assumption phi true, that makes the assumption phi true, also makes every line in the subproof true, including line j. So the one that has psi on it, including line j. So that means if the well-formed formula on I is true, the well-formed formula on line j is also true. So that is just part of what we are assuming in order to show that introducing a conditional from phi to psi is also truth preserving. So now suppose that the well-formed formula on line N is actually false. So, i.e., the value of phi implies psi is false. Now, by inspection of the truth tables, we then know that the antecedent has to be true and the consequent false, because that's the only way that a conditional can be false. But by our earlier assumption, let's go back here. So every truth value assignment that makes our assumption phi true also makes every line in the subproof true. So by this assumption that I've underlined in blue, if this truth value assignment makes phi true, then it also makes psi true. So this cannot be the case, that psi is both false and true. So our assumption, I'm gonna have to move up here, that line N could be false is contradicted. Well, if it can't be false, it must be true. So on the assumption that every application of every proof rule in the subproof is sound, then it will be a sound move in our proof to be able to close that subproof and introduce the conditional that goes from the antecedents assumed in the initial step of the subproof down to the formula that you derive at the end. So there is the soundness of conditional introduction. Next, we're going to do negation elimination, which is actually going to be very, very similar, because in negation elimination and negation introduction, you have this same assumption and subproof, and we will do the same sort of things. Like anytime that, if things are going right in the subproof, then things will go right if we do the application of the rule. So that will be the last one that we look at. Hope you're enjoying all of these, and come back to join me for the last one. Take care and see you then. Cheers.